Welcome to MSP Confidential. It's Friday, August 9th, and we're here once again for another installment of this little thing that we got going back in October, and we continue to bring on some really interesting guests. And today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Paul Riedl. Paul is CEO at Riverrun. Welcome to the live stream. How have you been, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Luis. I'm excited to answer some questions and have a great dialogue with you.
I love it. Well, it's funny because we were just checking in with Eric Torres, the famous or perhaps infamous. I don't know. At this point, the jury is still out. Eric Torres, our VP of Channel, because you guys used to work together many, many years ago. This is where Eric got his MSP career started. And
Yep,
it's actually what got me thinking about perhaps your very early in the business focus on a sales org and doing the sales things that businesses need to grow, that I often find MSPs tend to take a little bit longer evolution to get to, because they're kind of technical focused, or what we say here
sure.
very often, which is the accidental business owner. But maybe tell me a little bit about sort of that inception of the business and what was your mindset around sales as you got started and you got the thing off the ground.
Yeah, I love your accidental business that phrase because it is a case that as you get into a business you may be I'm gifted at being an engineer, and my advantage is I'm not gifted at being an engineer. So I was focused on how do we sell, how do we get out to the market. And when we first started River Run, there was one of the people that started it with me was he was a gifted technical mind. And so as we started River Run, we came from a different company. Pat Beezer was his name. He and his wife and I were started River Run, and Pat had the technical piece, and I had the business development and the business mindset of how do we get out and sell. And that was it's the sales piece is a very disciplined thing. So it's the same thing when if you're setting up your server or you're moving to the cloud, you have a process that you need to follow in order to make it successful. You have checks and balances, and it's the same thing with the sales process. Is that we've got checks and balances in place, and we've got different steps that you have to take, and it all comes down to numbers as well. And so because we understood that, we were able to stay focused on growing the organization from a $500,000 company to where we are now. So
Well, and I think this idea of like a technical co-founder is interesting because this is a model that's existed in SaaS for a long time, if you think about it. And you often hear, people that are coming up with an idea or something, they even are in the search of their technical co-founders to go and actually start their business operation in earnest, so to speak. And so I kind of love that because I think that is a failure or maybe a missed opportunity that a lot of early starts that are technically focused perhaps don't have, and they realize, oh yeah, they have a little bit of organic growth. We have some customers, family, friends, some extended businesses, and so on. And that quickly reaches a bit of a boiling point in that, okay, we got to go get more referrals now. The organic stuff is not
yep.
really doing it for us anymore. And so, again, just if you could take a trip through memory lane to what were some of maybe the early investments in this sales process that you think are now paying those dividends. And perhaps it's all process, perhaps it's just a bit of the mindset too. But curious how you think about now in hindsight about those things.
Well, if you look at again the sales process, the thing that helped us be successful is to really break it down from the point of, okay, we want to get this much, we want to get to this level of sales. And in order to get to this level of sales, what's it broken down to? How much of it is monthly recurring revenue? How much of that is going to be project based? How much of that is going to be break fix? And so as you put those buckets together, then you step back from that and say, well, how do we get to that, to each one of those things? Are projects to existing clients, and how would we market to them? Or are projects, are we going out into the marketplace to sell our project work? Our focus is to lead with the managed services, because the more we understand a client, the more we're managing their network, the more successful we can be in projects. So in most cases, we use managed services to bring projects to us, and managed services brings break fix work to us as well.
Mm.
So as we're looking at the sales process, and I hope I'm heading in the right direction, Louise, because old guys like me, we start wandering around and start just coming out talking about what's up in mind here, is when we're looking at the sales process, it's determining Where are we going to find each one of these areas? And then how do we get to them? And then it becomes break it down even further and saying, okay, well, how many appointments do I need to be able to get an opportunity to quote a managed service project? Then how many quotes do I need to get out in order to close a managed service project or managed service client, excuse me. And so as you look at that in a systematized approach, you can really break it down to I need to make X amount of phone calls or I need to go to Y amount of networking events in order to generate opportunities to be able to go and meet with clients and on first presentations and take first presentations and turn those into quote presentations and turn quote presentations into new managed services clients.
Yeah,
And
it's a
so
very
that's
pragmatic
it.
approach, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
And what I found and this is something that every business experiences is that you step forward and you rocket ship up to a certain level and then you hit that level and it's like you hit your head on the ceiling and then you kind of pound your head on the ceiling for a little bit and then go, oh, now what? Well, then all of a sudden you figure out what the next step is. So in our world, it was 3 million, 6 million, 9 million, 12 million and up. About every 3 million, we experienced a just bumping our heads. And then we'd have to evaluate, well, what's causing us to bump our heads? Do we have a people challenge? Do we have a process challenge? Do we have a tool challenge? Or do we have just a training challenge? And a lot of times the issue came back to this guy. This guy needed to make sure he was adjusting how he did things. Because one of the things I notice also is that when you look at the people that are just gifted technical minds, they have a hard time letting go of certain pieces to the puzzle. In my world, because I'm not the technical mind, I had a hard time letting go of I got to do the day-to-day sales and I got to get out there and I got to sell more stuff. Well, if I was doing that, I wasn't focusing on the processes of the business and the growing of the business. I was just focusing on bringing in some pieces of business. So I had to let pieces go, and then I had to let other things go inside of the business and saying, okay, well, I'm not going to be accountable for making sure the invoices are right. Somebody else is. Oh, I'm not going to be accountable to check in on the clients every day and say, hey, how are we doing? Somebody else is. And so that's the big thing too, is that some of the I've bumped into some amazing people that run businesses that are so gifted at the technology, and they're the kind of people that as soon as there's something, they roll up the sleeves and do the work. And that's wonderful. But if you're doing the work and not getting somebody else to do the work, then you're limiting your ability to grow. And that's fine. I mean, that's fine if that's your goal. If your goal is to get to a certain level and you want to hover there and you don't want to have a ton of employees or you don't want to have a ton of things going on, then you keep doing that.
Hmm.
That's great. But if you say, you know what, I want to get to that next level. What's the next level? And what do you need?
Yeah, and speaking of levels, this is interesting because you kind of pegged a bit of the stepping stones in terms of revenue, the 3, the 6, the 9, the 12,
Mhm.
and I find that these also very much correlate directly to people size and the growth in the company in terms of actual headcount. And so whenever I talk to folks and they're telling a little bit of the hindsight story of some of the pain points they went through and some of those inflection points in the business, getting past those head bumping stages, they often refer to, oh yeah, getting from 15 to 25 people was really difficult because there's so much more process or X, Y, or Z. And so I think it's interesting that you do it from a revenue perspective, but I assume a lot of that is also correlated to the people side.
Definitely correlated to the people side, because I mean, we're in service business. The people drive the business. Yes, we've got tools. Yes, we've got technology, but it's the people that are interacting with people. And I'll sidebar a little bit. And one of the things that we teach our engineers, we teach our sales, we teach our operations people is that we are not we are not taking care of a technical problem. We're taking care of a people problem or a people opportunity. And we have to make sure that we're connecting with those people in order to be able to solve a technical problem, because then you're collaborating, you're figuring out how to take care of that technical problem. So, so with the people challenge that you face is that it depends on, again, what's your capacity, how automated you are, when do you need to bring people in, and what are the right type of people. And again, you have to know your skills as the MSP owner. Is your skills managing people? Is your skills leading people? Is your skills babysitting people? Because if you look at at how do you work with people, if you're in a leadership position, it's you're babysitting. In other words, you're, saying, did you do your time logs? Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you wipe your nose? Did you, it's just staying on them. It's the managing saying, hey, here's where we're seeing your numbers are at right now. You need to make some adjustments, and let me get you some mentoring, and let me get you some coaching, and let me help you grow. Or is it the leadership where saying, hey, this is where we're going, help me get there. Let's everybody get behind me. And so it's again that right people is the toughest thing. And that's a tough thing for me. That was a tough thing for me again to learn as well. Because the other adage is that the people that got you to a certain level have to grow and have to develop to get you to that next level. And some people say, yep, I'm going to grow. Like I've got an engineer that's been with me for 25 years. He's grown in technical skills, but now he wants to be a leader. And so he's growing in leadership skills and he wants to continue. And I've got my director of sales. She's been with me for 18 years. Same thing, just growth, 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 growth. And it's because she's grown herself and her skill set to be able to get to help us get to that next level. But other people over the years have not, they haven't come out and said, I'm not going to grow anymore, but they've through their actions have said, I'm not going to grow anymore. And there's tough decisions that you have to make. Again, do I want to keep my company at this level, or do I want to grow to another level? And those are the tough decisions to make as well with people that, we want to have this family atmosphere. We want to have a great atmosphere. Well, it's got to be a two-way street as you're going through things. And that's where, as I look at the people that we have at River Run, I mean, we've got just some amazing people that are constantly looking at how do we take better care of our clients. They're wanting to grow, they're wanting to develop themselves, and they're wanting to just knock it out of the park. So that's fun to see, and it's fun to lead those types of people.
Yeah, I often use the expression that, people get into this business because they love tech, but they have to learn how to love helping people with tech. And it's such a
Yeah.
different, mindset and way of going to market. But, I have this distinct privilege of getting to talk with a lot of interesting folks that have grown their businesses to really incredible heights. And something that's quite common is that they all seem to have forgotten what it was like when they were small and going through a bit of the painful process of evolving, their own leadership skills, building a middle management team. And so I wanted to ask if there was a point in which you realized, shit, I can't do this unless I change this about myself. And what was a bit of the mindset in that process of change and evolution? Because it takes, I think it takes a big lift sometimes because, your identity comes into question. There's interesting things about that process that I think are difficult for some people to come to terms with, no doubt.
Yep. Yeah. Luis, that's a fun question, but that's one of those all-encompassing questions. You're a wise man, I tell you. So as we look at there's a phrase that one of my mentors gave to me, or some questions. He said you need to ask three questions. Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said now? And does it need to be said by me? Because my mind, I do what I call the Columbo. I walk around the business and I just kind of ask questions. And I don't know if I may be talking to people that don't have that Columbo reference, but he's a detective back in the 70s and he wore a big trench coat and he just would walk around and say, "Oh, by the way." And so when I say, "Oh, by the way," people start just kind of telling me stuff. And
Yeah.
so it's great. So, but the point is, do I have to react to it? How do I react to it? Because we as leaders have to remember that we may notice something and we may say, "Hey, why are you using a blue pen?" And it may be just been an innocent question, but that person now freaks out and says, "Oh my gosh, I can't use blue pens anymore. I need to use black pens only." And so that was the hardest thing for me because I'm always trying to learn and I'm always working to understand why are we doing something or how it's being done or how can we do it better. And that's one of those things that I have to step back and say, okay, I can't ask as many questions. Or if there is something about the business and it's in a certain part of the business, I have to think, who have I made accountable for that part of the business? And then I have to go ask them the question so that they can work with their team. Because if I'm working with somebody who's a middle manager or a level below that, I can cause a lot of ripples in the organization that are going to be like, yeah, Paul asked about this. And, oh my gosh, the world's coming to an end. And so we have to be very careful about what we're asking in that regards. The other part to that too is making sure that the people are trained and they understand clearly what the expectations are. And that's a big part to that. And that's something too that I had to let go because I'm eating, drinking, breathing, thinking this every day. And it's in my head. So it's like, well, yeah, Luis, you and I talked about this. Well, of course you know where the organization is going. Well, seriously, you don't understand that we're here to take really amazing care of clients? What and it's just we forget that people aren't eating, drinking, breathing, and doing the same thing we do every day. And so the other thing that I struggled with too is you have to repeat yourself over and over and over again. So it's the same way like the marketing we say in the world of marketing, you have to say something 7 times before somebody goes, "Oh, I didn't know you did that." Well, that's cool that you do that. Well, in when we're leading people, we have to say the same messages over and over and over, and it's probably 7 times 7 times 7 times 7 that we have to say the same thing so that people understand that this is the direction we're going. This is what we're focusing on. This is how we're doing these pieces. So those are some of the things that I struggled with. And again, I like to just get involved in a lot of stuff. If I see a problem or if a client calls, I'm just diving right in to figure out what's going on.
Hmm.
And I have to be very careful not to dive in too deep now because I have people that I've said, you're accountable for this. So if a client calls me and they're sharing a concern, I take that information and I say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give it to Luis and he's going to take care of it. And you'll hear back from Luis within 2 hours. And so it's just making sure that we're staying, I'm staying in my lane, I guess, as you'd say, that I'm not causing problems there.
I love the introspection of that because I don't remember where I heard it. It was some interview somebody was talking about. They were also a CEO at a large company, and they were commenting on how they had to stop having ideas because it was interesting that whenever they talked
Mhm.
about ideas that they were having, then people just went and did stuff, and oftentimes these things were distractions or they just were, and so it kind of is the segue to ask you about innovation in your business. I had this really interesting guy, Chris Do, who's a YouTuber, creative, talks a lot about business and the business of being in business. And one of the things he talked about was that a lot of small companies think they can't be innovators. And so, as a slightly larger MSP, from the average of 7 to 10 people, do you think about innovation? Do you have a crack team of people that are given the skunkworks things to work on, to reinvent processes, to reinvent things? What are your thoughts on how you evolve
Yeah.
some of those things?
The innovation, this is something that we do it fits and starts and we're good and we're okay and we're great at. And I say that because a lot of first off, we have a process for innovation and that may sound kind of contradictory, but the process for the innovation that we have is we look for we call it the 1%. Can we make a 1% improvement every day? And
Hmm.
if we can, that 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 just exponentially grows. So if I do a 1% improvement every day, 365 days later, with the compounding, it's 3,778% improvement. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that we have to make sure that we're purposefully being innovative, but we're also purposefully saying no. Because one of the challenges that we face is let's just call it the pass by idea. Somebody passes by and they say, "Hey, Paul, I got this idea. I think that I want to do this and this and this." And I'm like, "Okay, that seems interesting." Yeah. And then walk by, "Hey, Paul said we should do this." And then they just start charging off and doing that. Well, what we've come to is we now say we have a process for this. That now, if you have an idea, what I want you to do is you fill in what we call a BERT form, which stands for it's the benefit, the investment, the results we're looking for, and the timing. And so we do that not to slow down the ideas, but to start getting people to hone in on what's important and what is this idea really going to do for us and what's it going to cost us. Because if we're making an investment, we want to get a return on that. And the investment could be in people time, it could be in dollars and cents for product or subscriptions. But so we fill this form in, then it goes to a leader who then says, okay, does this make sense? How does this fit within our strategic goals for the year? Huh. Yeah, this is pretty cool. Okay. Now we take it to the next level and we say, okay, what's the timing on this? Is this Q2, Q3, Q4? When do we put this in play? When do we want to start this? And when would we want to finish it? And so we put it on what we call it the ascension stairs. We put it on our stairs and say, here's where it's going to go into play. Then we go back to that and determine who's going to lead this. Is it the person that gave the idea or is it somebody else? And if we determine whoever that is, then they have to create a plan. and it's a smart plan. So it's got the measurables, it's got the all the steps that they're going to take to get this done. And it also includes what we call a definition of success. What's our definition of success? Because that's a critical piece to ideas. When we sit in a room with 10 people, you're going to get 10 different ideas. When we sit in a room with 10 people and we say, here's what we're going to, here's an issue or here's something we want to do, those 10 people are going to have 10 different ways to make it a reality, and they're going to twist it just a little bit to fit what they want. And that's where you run into a lot of challenges that, especially in small businesses, that we start all these cool projects and then somebody takes it off the rails, not intentionally, but they think this is the right way to do this
Yeah.
when we've forgotten what the definition of success is. So as we have update meetings, we always read what's the definition of success first, and then we say, okay, now where are we? Because that helps us all remember this is where we're going. This is not it's not time to change our definition of success. We find that every project that's gone off the rails has not had a clear definition of success, or the definition of success was abandoned. Again,
Yeah.
intentionally, not intentionally, whatever it was, whoever was leading that didn't keep us on track. Is that making
Yeah. So,
sense?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely powerful because in the context of many things inside the business, um, and the perfect example is we were just doing a panel on this last week at CompTIA ChannelCon with a group of really talented people talking about the 5 steps to selecting a vendor. And one of the things that we're encouraging folks to do is, the business case process, which is very much, what you're talking about here in your BERT form, which I think is super interesting. I think it's not an infallible process necessarily because things change. And, in fact, one of the things that came up during that discussion is this idea of the sunken cost theory of like, how far down this process do you keep going if you've realized this is not going to work and you should pivot, but maybe you don't because you've invested so much already. And I'm
Right.
curious, even with a well-defined process and a well-defined outcome and expectations, and even ROI and metrics and everything else, sometimes things pivot. And so this is, I think, where the rubber meets the road is like how you handle those potential pivots. And I'm curious to know what your leaning is. You do keep power through to try and get to the stated outcomes and desires, or do you perhaps, take a step back, rethink, reinvent, and pivot the whole situation?
Yeah, it depends on what's happening, Luis,
Yeah.
because I'd love to say it's just this or it's just that. I mean, there's a lot of times we do muscle through because it is the right solution and we still have the right definition of success. We just may have not taken the right path. And so we have to adjust then the right path and go down that route. Um, but there are times where we are starting down a path, and that's why the definition of success is so powerful, because as we're plowing down that path, we all of a sudden look at it and say, huh, is that the right definition of success? And that's where we pivot. We may say, you know what? It's not. As we've done all this research and we've done all this work, we've discovered that that's not really the definition of success.
Mm.
And then we say, okay, let's reevaluate that and adjust that. And then we go back and look through what we've done and say, okay, do we need to change what we've done? Do we need to change the plan and then take it that level? I'd love to say we're amazing at this and we never falter. Oh my goodness, we are so precise. I mean, the Swiss watch company wants us to come and tell them how to do this. No, we are not. We drop the ball a lot. But that's one of the things too. My big recommendation is to have a master list of projects going on, because there's always somebody in our company that's got some project that's going on over here on the right hand side, and I'm like, what is
Mm.
this? And that's the only time that I answer the question with a yes. Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said now? Does it need to be said by me? You bet it does. Because if somebody's taken and not this project isn't, or this work is not up on the master list, nope, don't do it, because you're determining where we're spending our money, and we don't agree that should be done right now. And so then that's when I get a little snippy, let's say, and I want this on that list, to make sure that we aren't heading in the wrong direction. Because everybody's got a project, everybody's got a great idea, and they do it with the best intentions. There's no malice, there's no ego in there. It's just I just this is the right thing to do for the company, so I'm just going to do it. but they don't understand what are the ramifications. And that's why we have this process of making sure that we've got it squarely detailed on what we're doing and what's the priority. Because the word no to projects can save companies thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it can allow you to get the other things done that is going to make you hundreds and two hundreds and five hundreds and millions of dollars. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things I learned as well.
I think it's kind of ironic and funny how much we give ourselves a hard time for failing at processes. And I was reading by Ray Dalio this book called Principles. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ray Dalio. Very, very interesting guy. And one of the things he talks about in his book is learning to struggle well. And I thought this was so insightful because in the MSP industry, I think it's all about the struggle, and it's not about perfection necessarily. It's about constant evolution, continuous improvement, et cetera, et cetera. But I think this idea of struggling well is so powerful because if you can get into the positive mindset of the struggle, like you're unstoppable, right? And I think this is so interesting. We
Mhm.
give ourselves such a hard time when something's not going exactly as planned, but that's just kind of part of the path to success on whatever it is we're
Yep.
working on, I suppose. And so,
Right.
curious if you heard this idea of struggling well and if it rings, true for you in your life.
Yep. The struggling well concept is it definitely is right there. And it's definitely it's a reality because if you think about and I play a lot of soccer, I do a lot of water skiing, and I tie these two things together that in a soccer game, if you look at how many mistakes are made, there are hundreds that are made in a game. In 90 minutes, there's hundreds of mistakes are made. What the championship teams are able to do is they're able to rally and resolve that mistake and be able to then not make the same mistake over and over and over. So as we look at things, we say, you know what? Let's take some chances. Let's try some things. We're going to make a mistake. Let's learn from it. Let's rally. Let's share what we've learned and let's move this forward. And so the constant struggle is should be seen as, hey, we're playing this game really well, and when we drop the ball, let's figure out how to pick it up and let's keep going, and not say, ugh, we drop the ball all the time. Let's just sit around and lament about that. And boy, nothing ever goes right. You know what? Nothing ever does go right. It's called life.
Yeah.
You know.
Got a helmet.
But if we, yeah, and again, trust me, I have a hard time sometimes focusing on the positive things that go on because you do get, in our desks, the buck stops here, the pile of poo sits here too a lot of times, and we got to start saying, hey, you know what? There are some good things going on. What are let's consider this struggle an opportunity to accelerate. Let's say show that we're a championship team by rallying quickly and getting things resolved. Let's know that we are going to make a mistake and we're going to rally from that and move this forward. And with that mindset, that just helps us again make sure we're having fun, make sure that we're moving the clients, taking care of the clients, making sure we're helping each other. So,
Yeah. I think within that entire framework of communication is something that also smaller companies take a long time to figure out they really need inside their operation, even if it's a smaller business. And what I mean by that is just the management model, whether it's something like EOS or OKRs or some methodology. And I'm curious, what your thing in your business is that you've figured out was this is actually really unlocking a lot of our capabilities where we kind of just were chasing our tails before, perhaps.
yeah, so we use that traction EOS model, but it's going to be the R EOS. It's the River Run EOS model, because there's certain things in that model that just are spectacular, and then it's the hows and the how do we really apply this and how do we act within that model, and so that's where we've modified it with the River Run model, and that structure of the EOS was something that was just it was golden for us to start out with. And if anybody is going to think about doing any of that, it's you've got to get a facilitator for the EOS. We implemented it when we had about I think we had about 40 people in the company, and we kind of again we're hitting one of those ceilings, and we're trying to figure out how to move to the next level. And so we said, hey, this traction, this EOS thing, this is cool. Let's incorporate it. Let's just do this. We're smart. We can read a book. We can implement it. Sure enough, we did. We read a book. We implemented it. Sure enough, a year later, we read a book, we implemented it. Sure enough, no results. Well, what's going on?
Yeah.
So we ended up getting a facilitator in, and that facilitator, um, we you have to make sure you have the right facilitator too, because that facilitator just didn't have the strength to push back on us and say, no, 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 we're not going to do it. Because we pushed and we said, no, 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 we don't need to do that part because we've already done this. No, 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 we don't need to do this because we've done that. We're smart
Yeah.
people. We've already got it. Let's not do it. So we ended up having her boss come in and work with us because wasn't able to work with us. Well, he was able to, nope, this is how you do it. This is the line. You don't do this. He just kept us going through there. So it was wonderful because he was able to put us together. So you have to find the right facilitator in that regards because that'll help get you
Mm,
the discipline. And so as we went through that, the big lesson that we learned too is that all right, we got to make sure we get the structure, but we also have to listen to what else is out there and try it and let's run through it and see how it works for us. And if it works for us, great, keep doing it. If it works for us, but we find that we're bumping our heads on something, well, let's figure it out. Let's change it. Let's change that process. And so, as I said, we've modified some of the EOS for the river runway, but for the most part, if you peel back the onion, it's following the majority of that structure. Now, the thing that we didn't do very well is passing that down and making sure that it's sunk in at the next level, the next two levels of leadership within the organization.
mm,
And that's where it was, well, we're having EOS, we're doing it, we're doing these L10 meetings where we've got the structure, and then the next level it kind of got a little looser, and then the level after that it wasn't being followed as well, even though we were told it was by the people running those areas. But again, I had to do some Columboing, and I just dove in and just started. Oh, hey, how does this go? And I'd drop in a meeting, and I'd just sit and listen, and found that we weren't following it. So then we had to retool and just make sure everybody underneath was understanding the EOS and how do we do these things.
makes sense. And I
Yeah.
found the same. And interestingly, um, at ScalePad, one of the things that we ended up implementing is a bit of a combination of the EOS model and OKRs. Actually, we found that at a certain size, the EOS rocks fail at getting specific enough with the outcomes and the goals. And so we ended up doing OKRs as well. For those unfamiliar with OKRs, it stands for objectives and key results. And it's a much more nuanced way of stating the measurable outcomes that you want to get to through the goals. And those were also a little bit more visible where I feel sometimes rocks tend to live in the abstract to some extent. And so I find that, sometimes people get stuck with like the visibility of the goals and several layers down, people are not following the process. And a lot of it stems, I guess, from just kind of not understanding where it is that the goals are trying to take us or what those metrics are and the measurements. And so it's an interesting pivot to try and talk about metrics and the things that you sort of see as critical drivers internally. As a sales focus guy, perhaps a lot of the company objectives maybe sit around the sales metrics. I'm sure service is a big component of that, but maybe talk to me a little bit about the goals, KPIs, and metrics, and how you set those at a strategy level to ensure the whole company is driving towards the same place.
Yeah, and again, I'd love to just say, Luis, oh, we're so good at this. This is perfect. A
Remember,
lot of
struggle
it,
well, struggle well.
yeah, yeah, right on. Um, a lot of so the metrics that we're looking at is we're looking at billable time, we're looking at the utilization, we're looking at the client's retention, we're looking at our team member retention. We're also then looking at the tickets that are over a certain number of days because we want to make sure that we're keeping tickets under a certain period of time. We have time limits for onboarding a client. How much time will that take? So we're watching that. We're watching different parts of our business with the metrics as well because we have the managed services, the true managed services piece, flat rate, and then we do it. And then we also have a managed services where it's basically kind of like a pay as they go. And so our marketplace wants both of those things right now, and so we're offering both of those. Well, they're they're kind of competing because one, you want to be as efficient as possible and be able to deliver that service and just with, as quickly as possible so you can make a higher margin. And the other is, hey, you want to be able to deliver the service quickly, but you also want to make sure that you're spending the billable time that you should with that client. And so it is very important that we are watching those numbers. And so I'm looking at the numbers where I'm looking at the labor hours that we're spending, and I'm looking at the margins on our managed services piece. And those, in essence, are the two big gauges that I watch. And if those gauges start to show me a little bit of red, then I, tap the gauges a couple times to make sure that is there a problem with the gauge, or what's happening. And when I tap it, if it stays in that area, then I just go into the person that's accountable for that gauge and say, hey, what's happening? And then they pull back, they open their dashboard and start looking at their gauges that are affecting that gauge. And they can start saying, oh, here's a challenge that we see, or here's something that's going on. So in my role in looking at gauges, I'm trying to say, I use the analogy of an airplane, and that we need to make sure that I've got enough gas and I've not got enough altitude to get up over that mountain. And so sales is putting the gas in for me. The engineering team is making sure I have the right altitude with the power. And if there's anything that's affected, then I have to dive in with that. Now there's other things that we're looking at too. In the sales land, we're watching again, what's our backlog and potential business? How many projects are we bringing in? What's the sales gross margin that we've brought in for a particular month? And we've got the target down by week, so we can see if we're starting to fall behind. If we're starting to fall behind 3 weeks, whoever's in the accountable for that department has to come to this leadership meeting and say, here's what's going on. And they either say, I'm stuck. Can you all help me? Help me brainstorm this, run through this issue. Or they say, here's my plan for addressing this, and here's what's going to happen, and here's the measurables, and here's the change that we're going to see. And then we see how that's going the next couple of weeks as we go through things.
Hmm.
So that's it. That's kind of the metrics that we use, and then how we use those things. With regards to tying it into the strategy, it's interesting because, again, when you start looking at that strategic, when you use that word, oh, it's strategic, or is this tactical? You kind of bounce between the two. And so as we're talking about the strategy, how do these numbers tie into the strategy? It's our objective is to grow the organization. And so, okay, well, is that the strategy that we have? Well, no, the strategy that we have is we're growing the organization through amazing service so that we don't lose clients. We're also growing it through acquisitions, as far as, who can we acquire with that. So that's kind of part of our strategy for the growth. So now, then we've got the tactical pieces that all fit in there. What are the numbers that come into those things? Because again, the M&A activity that we have, that kind of goes with some fits and starts, and it's opportunistic at times where somebody will just say, "Hey, I'm selling my business. Can we talk?" And we're like, "Sure." Other times they're saying, so it's got to be more of a sales process, because the M&A is part of our growth strategy. So
Hmm.
hope I answered that one okay for you.
Yeah, it's fluid, absolutely fluid, and I think it's interesting though that the strategy has to be stated in a way that it gets people to, hitch their wagon to the Jeep, so to speak. And I think that's an interesting part of strategic thinking is what's the thing that's going to get everybody excited about us all rowing in the same direction. So, but
Right.
you mentioned billing models, and I thought this was interesting because at the size you guys are. You'd think that the academic beatings that we get in the industry of going all in on managed services might have taken hold, but it's interesting that you talked about, hey, there's your market perhaps is demanding some break fix, and that you incorporate as that part of your sales strategy. And there's been recent conversations, I think, especially with compliance kind of showing its head a little bit more, that the dynamic of strategic conversations with clients is shifting a little bit, and that the all-in approach to billing is maybe leaving money on the table, perhaps because there's a lot of time and investment that goes into this strategic approach. That we're calling it strategic, but it tends to be quite tactical in nature, very infrastructure focused, et cetera. And so maybe there's this whole layer that we're kind of missing out on as MSPs, and getting to a different type of conversation with clients, especially when the clients are growing as well and at a certain size where they need to start thinking about these things more holistically. But tell me about your thought process behind, hey, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do some break fix, and we're going to do some managed services, and how you manage a bit of the maybe the rub or difficulty and operational efficiency that exists just inherently from having two different go-to-market models effectively.
Yeah. The as we talked about, and as you alluded to, that they are competing factors, the break fix model versus the managed services model. Um, but you can see that one one gives more control to the client and the other gives more control to us. And so what I mean by that is that if a client has older equipment and they don't want to replace the older equipment for whatever reason, well, then they go under the pay as you go model because we can't take the risk for that situation. If a client is okay, they want to stay compliant, they want to make sure that they've got the proper equipment, well, then they can go under that managed services model that we have. The challenges that we faced over the years is, well, what do we include in that
Mhm.
model, and how do we keep from making the client feel like they're getting nickel and dimed, and how do we avoid the runaway freight train, and now with, as you mentioned, the compliance, well, how do we fit the compliance in? Because, well, everything's included in this agreement, and we have to be very careful and very clear of what's included and what's not included. And so as we're going through this, and we're actually evaluating this right now as far as what should we be including, because we've got some clients that it's a runaway train because they just are like, well, yes, you've got implementation of workstations is included. Okay, great. So we can implement them. Well, they're doing, 10, 15 new people a month. And so we were counting on 10, 15 for the year. So it's those are the types of things that you have to make sure that you're thinking about. And then taking it to that next level too of making sure that when you're putting the contracts together and you're working with the client, that you're figuring out how do we create a win-win-win situation. It's
Yeah.
got to be good for the client. It's got to be good for our people servicing that client, and it's got to be good for River Run. And if it's usually good for the first two, it's good for River Run. But we have to be very careful because there are times where clients turn it into it's good for the client, but it's not good for the company, this us, and it's not good for our people because it's a runaway train. And so those are the types of things that we struggle with as we're looking at the that managed services, that pay as you go versus it's all included. And so we really hone in on making sure up front that the client understands what's included and what's not included and the whys. Third party applications, that's something that we
Yeah.
include, but we include it to a certain level. We say, okay, we're going to troubleshoot this. If we determine, if after an hour that it's this, it's ABC software is got the issue, not the infrastructure. Well, then we'll say to the client, we will continue working with ABC company for you, but that's billed outside of the agreement. And they kind of take that as an opportunity for us to, oops, I'm sorry about that. One moment.
We lost Paul to a critical interruption. I hope it was worth it. Um, just in quick summary, we're talking about billing models in case you're just jumping in, and the challenges that exist in getting the client expectations to really be clear. You okay there, Paul?
I am sorry. I've got my dog who spends most of the day with me got excited because somebody else came to the door that she hasn't heard before. So sorry about that, everybody. But yes,
You're
so
good.
so those model pieces, that's it, just clarity and not in an adversarial way. That's the thing. This isn't a win-lose situation. And if you're
Yeah.
working with a client that's a win-lose client and that's their mindset, I would make a really strong suggestion that you have them go work service by somebody else because it'll slow them down. And if you're slowing them down, well, then you can find more clients that are more aligned with you and your values. So,
Yeah.
um, long-winded. Sorry about that.
No, it's important, and I think this is part of exactly the kind of conversations that are happening out in the market right now. Because, as I mentioned, compliance is kind of bringing this whole other layer of client relationship, a level of involvement from the client in the strategic discussion, as opposed to just the traditional delegated everything. You guys handle this kind of thing. And it's kind of bringing up to conversation. It's bubbling up this idea of like, we can't include this in our managed service agreement because there's this whole other level of investment of time and knowledge and expertise and risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then the list continues that I think needs to be properly compensated. And I think it's a constant evolution and exercise to reevaluate your growing expertise, your growing capabilities, and whether what you're charging is meeting those needs.
Right.
Certainly in the eyes of clients, everybody loves when things stay the same forever, but that's not realistic, of course. And it's interesting that we
Yep.
have traditionally been really bad at having those conversations too. And so maybe it's
Right.
an interesting way to ask you, how you guys deal through price increases and difficult conversations. Some people are very pragmatic about the difficult conversations, but others really sort of, put them off and put them off because they're difficult to have.
Right. The To answer the question directly, we do okay at it. And it depends on what part I'm saying the okay piece on. We have an increase that goes out on an annual basis with regards to our managed services, and that's an annual basis. It's an increase, a small increase that goes on, and so we do that well. Where we struggle is that if a client has an agreement and it's just going right off the rails completely. And it's you're down at a negative margin on servicing that client. That's where at times it's, well, I don't want to go and tell them because they're a big client and we might lose them as a client. And that's again that we have to get pragmatic about it. And so when I was leaving that in the engineering team's hands to say, okay, take care of it and talk with them and get a salesperson involved and go, and we wasn't getting done because people were nervous about that. So we've done that, has escalated that up to the leadership level that we're watching. And if we see, if clients are on the watch list for more than 3 months, then we go and start having we have a conversation with the client. But you have to go with the data, because you can't just say, boy, we thought you were going to spend $5,000 with us a month, and we're spending $6,000. It's where do you see the challenge? Where do you see the increase? Where do you see it that it's a runaway train? It's, oh, this application is causing us a problem, and that's why. So what could we do? How can we work with the client to get that application to be more stable? Do we have to talk to that third party? What do we need to do that? So it's that collaborative approach and working with the client that creates that longer term bond versus just, yeah, we need to raise it because we're not making any money. Well, the clients want you to make money to a point, and but they want to make sure that you're giving them great service. And so you can't have those things be competing. They have to work together. You have to get paid, make the certain margins so that you can continue to provide the right level of service to that client.
Yeah.
And so that's a big piece too. So knowing and understanding your your costs and understanding where there's a runaway train happening is really critical. And one of the things that I've found interesting too is that, and I encourage everybody to do, is to really understand and know and include all your costs. Because I've had a lot of opportunities where people say, "Oh my gosh, we've got a 70% margin on all of our contracts." And I'm just like, "Wow, you guys are rock stars." I'm excited. I'm hovering around 45 and I'm like, "Wow, that's amazing." Oh, well, you're doing it wrong. Oh, okay. Help enlighten me. Well, what they're missing is some of the costs. I'm putting in all of my direct costs. I'm putting all of the subscriptions. I'm putting in all of the labor that goes and involved. I'm including the leadership expense needed to support that, because that's all part of the cost of delivering that service. And when I peel back the onions and I'm talking with others, there's things that they don't include, and their margins are higher. But then they say, well, how's the net income? How does that compare to your top line?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're at, this level. Ah, okay. So that's where we have to understand our numbers to make sure that our costs are giving us the results that we want. Because that's the bottom line, is the one that we're all thinking about and worried about.
This is an interesting thing. The transparency of how money flows in the business, I think, is a fascinating conversation to have because as MSPs, I think that's an interesting question of ask of our clients to truly get to the bottom of where we can have technology make an impact truly in how their business is operated. But I think internally, it's interesting that many MSPs are a little cagey about, how the money flows, where more of the money is
Mhm.
made, and what's actually contributing to the success or ultimate failure of the company. And I'm
Right.
curious how you approach that internally. And you can also say skip. We'll move on to the
Yeah.
next thing.
No, it's 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 a great topic because different people are going to have different philosophies about what you share. We share inside of River on my leadership team. They see the complete the complete income statement on a monthly basis and where we are year to date, and so they understand where we are with those numbers. The rest of the company, we have an all company meeting once a month, and we're talking about some of the key indicators, the key numbers that they have more control over, but that won't cause them to say, "Boy, this company's making so much money. I should be making a ton more." We look at the top line, and so we've got a number for that. Then we're looking at the what we call the sales gross margin, the dollars that are coming in on a monthly basis, and then we look at the invoice gross margin. And so there's a bonus pool that is created based off of how are we doing on the invoice gross margin. And we explain the relationship between all three of those numbers so that people understand the how they tie together. But then the other objective is so that we can have conversations with individuals and say, well, this is how you affect how you affect the IGM, how you can affect the SGM, because the SGM is the indicator as far as how well we're going to be doing with an IGM. So, example, an engineer says, well, I'm just going to go out, I'm going to service the client. Well, yeah, open up your eyes though. Is there anything else that the client should have incorporated?
Right.
Well, this client's got their server sitting on the floor. Ah, and is it in a secured room? No, it's in a general area. Okay. Well, is it in the client's best interest to put this in a cabinet and lock it up? Yes, it is. Is that a good security piece? Yes, it is. Great. Let's make that recommendation because that if the client goes and gets that rack the way we recommend or the cabinet, now the IGM is going to go up. So now the bonus is going to go up. So that's going to help you. And so it's just helping people understand that, hey, you just did a great thing for the client. And the other result is you did a great thing for River Run and you did a great thing here. So that is the ultimate win-win-win that we're looking for.
Yeah.
Am I
You,
making
you
sense on that?
Yeah, you're making so
Okay.
much damn sense, Paul. It's
Huh.
it's incredible. I think these are the things that it's laughable sometimes that like you look at it, it's like, yeah, that's actually quite common sense, and a lot of it just comes down to execution. We every single conversation seems to all roads lead to execution. And so this is why I see such a unique difference between, the sales leaders that are MSP owners and the technical leaders that are MSP owners,
Hmm.
because the execution is often a little bit different. I think part of the thing that maybe helps execution, you talked about having a mentor. And I was curious to ask you about mentorship, how you see mentorship and what mentorship you guys do within the organization. And just, I guess, how you think about mentorship in general.
Yeah. Mentorship is critical on every single level of an organization, every single level from the top down. I have three mentors that the poor guys are just constantly hearing from me. When I'm making tough decisions or when I'm doing something tough, they're constantly, hearing from me about, how would you handle this? What do you think? And how does this work? And they're just fantastic, just great, great men and fantastic business people. The other thing is I'm in a Vistage group. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but the Vistage groups are fantastic because you get people from different businesses together or different industries that meet once a month, and it's basically like your board of advisors. And they if you're in the right group, it's brutal. I mean,
Yeah.
brutal. It's that tough love thing. It's right then and there. and it works in that, as you have an issue, they'll help you flush through that issue. But if you haven't done anything by the next meeting on to resolve that issue, they're like, what are you doing? They're helping hold you accountable in that regard. So that's again where mentors help you. They get different perspectives. I have this three different mentors because they come at things from different angles. And then
Mm.
I can get that different perspective so that I can make a solid decision or direction in that regards to move it forward. The monthly meeting with the Vistage group is, I mean, at times I'm like, oh, I can't carve out the whole day. I got a million other things, but there's always a nugget that I leave that meeting with, or I'm able to help somebody else, or we have guest speakers at times that are giving again different perspectives, and that's brutally helpful. The other thing too is so I'm encouraging, most of the leadership people to be, let's get mentors outside of the organization as opposed to just in. When we get down to the next level of the people that are coming in, and this is something that we've just recently been focused on. It's how do we create a stronger mentorship program for the new people that are coming into the organization? Does it have to be a senior engineer that they're working with, or does it have to be a senior account executive, or could it be somebody else at a different level? And so as we're talking about that, we're really focused on the how do we grow this, um, how do we grow the mentorship so that it's just more seamless and it's a better opportunity for somebody to just ask a question that they may be nervous to ask in a team meeting, but boy, Luis, I can ask you this question because I've had lunch together and
Yeah.
I don't feel silly by asking that question. So mentorship, figuring out a good mentor program for somebody for the organization is fantastic. And when people at a certain level, having them find mentors outside of your company is wonderful as well, because they're going to get different perspectives. And a lot of times those mentors are going to say to your people, hey, you don't have it so bad there. This is awesome. I mean, look at what goes on over in this place. Whereas if your mentor is only inside of the river run bubble, well, then you don't get that different perspective and stuff like that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, I think the echo chamber and the bubbles is one of the things that maybe holds us back so much. And this is an area that I really love when I get the chance to sort of be immersed in an entirely different industry or way of doing business or activity, and then find those interesting parallels. And so you mentioned water skiing, and I promised Eric, because when I asked Eric, hey, what is Paul passionate about? Eric said, well, he likes water skiing. I was like, I'm sure there's something business related that we could make a kind of parallel to. And so I'm wondering if you think about these sort of parallelisms between
Sure.
extracurricular activities and business.
I really do, because it helps to find the humor in it. At times, it also helps to think, oh yeah, there is that thing. So in water skiing, you've got different aspects to it. It's one is, just getting up out of the water. How do you do it? You have to have a specific form. You have to do it, follow that, and do it just right. So you have to have a process for that. Once you're up, if we're skiing a course, you have to plan how you're going to ski that course. How fast are you going to go? How are you going to ride the ski? How are you going to come, approach the buoys? At what point are you going to make your turn? And so as you're watching as you're working that, it's the same thing in business. What's your plan? Let's start with that. What's your plan? Then what are your standards? And then when those standards aren't working anymore, or you've made a mistake, how do you recover? So again, water skiing, if I hit that buoy and I bounce off it instead of getting around it, well, I got to ride now differently. I got to adjust how I go to try to catch that, be able to get my speed back up and catch that next buoy. And so it's the same thing in business. If you miss a sales mark 1 month or one period, you've got to now say, what am I going to do to catch up? How do I jump back on that ski a little differently so that it'll take off faster? How do I make that happen? And then you know what? There are times when you're going to hit that buoy and just wipe out. And you go, oh man, you got two ways to approach that. You say, oh, I'm never getting back on a ski ever again. And I'm just done. And just get me off the water. Or you can say, hey, you know what? I got to get back on the ski because I got to get through that and I got to figure out what happened there. And that's the challenge. And same thing in business. There are times people sell their businesses at the end at when they're in the basement because it's like I don't have the energy to pull myself out anymore. And it's the same thing. I don't have my energy to pull myself out of a turn anymore because I'm too tired, I'm too exhausted. So that's the other part to this is you got to make sure that you're back having fun because when I'm skiing and if I'm too intense and I'm too focused on trying to get to that next thing, I go, huh, I'm supposed to be out here having a blast and I'm struggling. And it's the same thing in our businesses. If we're struggling every day, you got to look at what's causing that. Why aren't you hitting the targets? What's going on? Do you have the right people around you? And that's the piece too is do you have the right people? Because man, the right people in the room makes it a blast. When you're having a problem or you're having a heck of a great debate, the right people will help you adjust. Same thing with water skiing. And I'm really tying this back together for you, Luis, is that,
I love
with
it.
the water skiing, you have to have the right driver. You got to have the right equipment. You got to know, you got to have the right water conditions. I mean, ideally, you're going to have the right water conditions. And so you got to make those adjustments that, it's a real windy day, or this is a driver I'm not used to. So, how's that going to happen? The perfect pass isn't working well. So are my speeds kind of varying a little bit? Well, how's that going to affect me at this point? And so it is the same thing in business. You just got to go, you know what? Am I having fun? And if I am, cool. If I'm not, well, why not? And a lot of times it can be the people you have in the room because you're struggling with one or two people and it's just they don't have the same mindset. And it's not that they're bad, it's not that they're the wrong, just they're not good people. It's that, maybe they're not the right person for you or the right person for your business.
Hmm.
And then that's the tough part. You got to make those decisions. And I've had to make those decisions over the years.
And
And
so
as I pound my head against the wall, but go ahead.
in the spirit of the Olympics, what would you say the sport is that would resemble the best possible scenario of an MSP in practice? Is it artistic water skiing, or something? I'm maybe
That's
going off
good.
on a tangent here, but
I'm going to go back to I just think I mean again it's near and dear to my heart is the game of soccer or football as the rest of the world calls it. Um, it's because you have to have teamwork. You have to have teamwork. You have to have accountability. I'm accountable for this part of the field. I'm accountable for this activity. I'm accountable for this piece. And you have to be able to rally quickly and circle back for each other. So if I make a mistake, I need somebody to make sure they're covering up for me, helping me out.
yeah,
So that redundancy factor comes into play. And again, any sport, any team sport that you've got is gonna involve that same thing. It's really having the people on the team or who is the leader. What are the expectations? Are they clear for us? What are our goals? Are we going to be able to get those, hit those goals? Are we doing the right things? Are we training the right way to make that happen? If you think about business versus the sports, we train for sports 5 days a week and we play one game a week. In business, we train for business. We play the business game every day, but we train for business
yeah, very
maybe
little.
once a month, maybe once a quarter, maybe well, we meet with our people once a week, but are we really doing training? Are we really doing the wind sprints? Are we
Mm,
really, juggling the ball? Are we really passing it? Are we really working on those things?
I love
So
that.
that's again how I tie it all back to the wonderful world of soccer and the wonderful world of water skiing.
That's perfect, man. Well, Paul, you're a scholar and a gentleman. I appreciate
Oh, you're too kind.
your generosity so much, your transparency and willingness to talk about all these interesting insider baseball things. It's always fascinating to get into it, and the hindsight of the various inflection points in the business throughout time. And so, thank you so much for coming and hanging out for a little bit of this Friday afternoon here. I realize you're probably aching to get back on the water now, Friday afternoon, it's middle of the summer. So I'll try not to keep you any longer from that. And I'll just say thank you again.
You're
And
welcome,
folks,
and thank you for the time.
yeah, it's our pleasure. And folks, we're here every Friday for MSP Confidential, 12 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Or sorry, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. We hope you'll join us next week, and we'll see everybody very soon. Until then, thank you so much.